The PlayStation 5 is still just a little over a year old, so obviously we're not even close to the point where we begin seeing exclusives that take full advantage of that hardware. But while we wait for that, developers have been taking the opportunity to go back to older games from the PS4 generation and bring them to the more powerful new console, or to release cross-gen titles whose PS5 versions might not be leaps and bounds above their PS4 counterparts, but do still offer meaningful improvements. Whether it's free upgrades, those cross-gen titles, or paid remasters and re-releases, there's been a few games that have done that quite well, and here, we're going to talk about some of them. Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima is the sort of game that will likely be a visual spectacle no matter how old it gets, because though it's no slouch in the technical department, its gorgeous art style is what really makes it shine. Even so, that technical department did get a significant touch-up with Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut on the PS5. Experiencing its stealth and combat in 60 frames per second while also getting to enjoy the natural beauty of Tsushima and Iki Island in 4K is one of the most breathtaking experiences we've had on the PlayStation 5 yet. Then there are the loading times, which have already seen like a 400% improvement, and that they're now a second long as opposed to the already incredibly quick 4 seconds they took on the PlayStation 4. Go ahead and use those extra 3 seconds well. Maybe, follow another songbird through the forest for a couple more seconds than you would have otherwise. The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 hasn't seen a dedicated native release on the PlayStation 5 yet. Maybe it will in the future, it's hard to say right now. But it does see some noticeable boosts when moving across generations. While not as comprehensive an upgrade as some of the other games on this list, on the PS5, The Last of Us Part 2 does still not only maintain a 1440p resolution, but also delivers a rock-solid 60 frames per second that barely ever dips. And of course, even though it's released on the dated hardware of the PlayStation 4, it's still one of the best-looking games ever made. Marvel's Spider-Man. It's a little disappointing that even now, there's just no way to get Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered on the PlayStation 5 as a standalone purchase, not only because that seems like such an obvious option that players should have, but also because this is a really, really good remaster. Across multiple graphical modes, not only does it offer higher resolutions and higher and more stable frame rates, it also adds ray tracing to the game, which brings its world to life in a way that the PlayStation 4 could never allow. Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. Here we move into cross-gen territory. Similar to the remastered release of its predecessor, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales impresses in different ways across its performance and resolution favoring models. Playing this game at a 60 frames per second in particular is an absolute treat, while the implementation of ray tracing deserves special props as well. On the PlayStation 5, the game also makes subtle but still noticeable use of the DualSense's haptic feedback and adaptive triggers, which is another point in this game's favor. Ratchet & Clank from 2016. Insomniac Games went back to Ratchet & Clank 2016 and gave it a nice facelift on the PlayStation 5 with a patch earlier this year. The biggest update here, of course, is the ability to play the game at 60 frames per second, which invariably improves the playing experience no matter what game you're playing, for the most part. Death Stranding. One of 2 PlayStation published titles to get a Director's Cut re-release in 2021, Death Stranding's PS5 upgrade is another one that deserves a lot of praise. This was already a great looking game, so the fact that it looks even better while being able to run at a consistent 60 frames per second is nothing to scoff at. Meanwhile, DualSense implementation is also probably better than we've seen in most games up until now. And of course, there's some new content for players to dive into here as well, which makes the upgrade feel even more significant. Blood and Truth. It'll be a while before we see Sony developing native VR games for the PS5, what with the next-gen PSVR helmet still being in the works. But even so, PS4-era PSVR titles running on the PS5 in backward compatibility can still look and run pretty darn good. Take SIA London Studios' first-person shooter Blood and Truth, for instance, which benefits from the PS5's added power in a number of ways, including higher frame rates, improved resolution, higher detail assets being used at all times, and improved texture detail. Horizon Zero Dawn. Nearly 5 years on from its launch, Horizon Zero Dawn is still a visual stunner, and even though it hasn't seen a native PS5 re-release, it does look and run better on the console. Much like The Last of Us Part 2, the focus on this particular upgrade was squarely on performance being boosted to 60 frames per second, which honestly feels like a solid free patch for a game that isn't exactly new at this point. With Horizon Forbidden West launching not long from now as a cross-gen release, we're excited to see how that'll stack up on both consoles. God of War. Yet another first-party PlayStation exclusive that got a 60 frames per second boost on the PlayStation 5 via a backward compatibility patch. It might not be the most headline-grabbing upgrade you'll ever see, but it does exactly what it needs to with its improved performance. It makes what was an already excellent game feel even better to play and control. Much like Horizon, God of War's upcoming sequel is obviously going to get a much bigger boost on the PlayStation 5 than its predecessor did, and we can't wait to see what that looks like. Sackboy: A Big Adventure. Surrounded by heavyweight blockbuster hits like The Last of Us Part 2 and God of War, you might think Sackboy: A Big Adventure feels out of place in this list, but don't let its cutesy, crafted aesthetic fool you. Though the charming art style is clearly what helps the platformer's visuals stand out, Sackboy is a pretty solid game on a technical level as well. On a PlayStation 5 running at a dynamic 4K and at a stable 60 frames per second, as compared to a shocking 720p and 30 frames per second on the base PlayStation 4. Of course, the excellent implementation of the DualSense also allows the game to be a much more enjoyable experience on the PlayStation 5. The Nioh Collection. These are remasters that feel like they exist on merit, not because their publisher just wanted to make a quick buck by capitalizing on the power of a brand. The Nioh games looked really good on the PlayStation 4 as is, and performance was never problematic in the Duo either, but the PS5 remasters are easily the best way to experience both games. Across multiple modes, the game boasts significantly improved visuals and performance, with the latter even going up to 120 frames per second, if you have a screen that can support it, while the improved load times are also a huge bonus. Ghost Runner. Ghost Runner's fast, slick, blistering movement and action made it a perfect example of a game that will always be a better experience with improved performance instead of improved resolution. On the PS5 though, the game's upgrade doesn't have to choose between the two. There's support for 4K resolution, 120 frames per second performance, post-processing HDR, 3D audio, and DualSense implementation, all of which comes together to ensure an experience that is meaningfully and noticeably better than its PlayStation 4 counterpart. Though, of course, given how great this game is, you won't exactly be going wrong if you choose to just play it on the PlayStation 4 either. Ride 4. Before its launch, no one would have expected Ride 4 to be able to come close to photorealism with its visuals, or close enough at least. But surprisingly enough, that's where we are. The game looks great no matter where you play it, to be honest, but on the PlayStation 5, with dynamic 4K support, 60 frames per second performance, and excellent DualSense implementation, it offers some solid upgrades over the game's PlayStation 4 version. Meanwhile, thanks to the PlayStation 5's SSDs, not only does the game have incredibly fast load times, it also streams in assets much better than it does on the PlayStation 4, which means the environments around you look sharp, even when you're racing through them at breakneck speeds. Control. Control had some issues running well on the base PlayStation 4, if we're being mild about it, with long load times and terribly inconsistent frames being its chief issues. With Control Ultimate Edition, though, the game's console experience realizes its promises and delivers the experience that this was always meant to be. Not only is the performance significantly more stable, there's also a 60 frames per second option. On top of that, there's a solid ray tracing implementation and improved resolutions, while the adaptive triggers are put to use better than they are in most other PlayStation 5 games. Resident Evil Village. Originally announced only for new-gen consoles, Resident Evil Village ultimately ended up being a cross-gen game, and though there isn't exactly a night and day difference between the game's PlayStation 4 and 5 versions, it's an excellent game no matter where you play it. It's still pretty clear that the new console has a major leg up over its predecessor where Capcom's horror sequel is concerned. All the typical praises for improved performance and resolution apply here, of course, but Resident Evil Village also deserves special props for how excellently it uses the PlayStation 5's 3D audio to heighten its atmosphere, which is already one of the game's biggest strengths even on base consoles. And that brings us to the end of this video. A quick request before we conclude: we upload new videos every single day, and if you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing. It really helps us out. Also, don't forget to enable all your notifications by clicking the bell icon so that you can receive daily video updates. Thanks for watching.